Thank you for being here. Otherwise, I'd have to just present to the camera, I suppose, so it recorded. What I wanted to talk about in this session was a little bit of my experiences of doing research with students, but and then I was thinking about the theme of the conference and co-creating. And I said, "Oh yes, I do co-creation and research with students." And the first thing it then made me think about initially was the different contexts that I do co-creation in. So thinking about the different sort of, working with project students, working with students who might be doing a particular module that we run in psychology, assistantship module, or sort of summer internships, things like that. And then it really brought me back as well to that, okay, what do I mean when I say co-creation, research co-creation with students? So I'm going to attempt to cover a little bit of both those things, and then finish by talking a little bit about why I do it, why I think it's important, and what I think I've kind of learned from it, really, how to try and do it well. Um, so starting with that, what do we mean? This word co-creation, it's cropping up everywhere, isn't it? And if we look at sort of the most basic definition of it, it's about doing something together, making or producing something that exists. Is that basic? Okay, that's what the dictionary says co-creation means. But it then made me really reflect and think about, well, what do we really mean then? How together we could co-create something that's my idea that I want to achieve, and you might have a small role in it. Is that really co-creation, or is that just kind of some collaboration helping? And I started to look a little bit about the literature and what had been written about this concept of co-creation. And it's something that's been written a lot about, it seemed, in sort of business and things like that. Um, and they then more helpfully defined it and talked about a model of co-creation that was built on cooperation and then collaboration, with cooperation kind of being almost the lowest level, that we're just working together to support each other's goal. So, for example, if we're thinking of a student and an academic, the student might want to get the best degree that they can, a good mark. The academic might want to help the student, but also thinking about their own, good degree rates, etc. The things that might be motivating us, making sure our students are happy, that they've got good satisfaction. So we might be working together in order to try and make sure the student does well and that they have a satisfying experience. But that's not really co-creation. That's just collaboration. Whereas if we work more closely together, we become more collaborative. But the thing that really seems to define co-creation is where, and the business literature talked about customers, but I think what I'd really want to talk about here is students. And I don't want to say that students are customers, definitely not, but that students are involved in a way that adds value. So without the student, the end product would not be it wouldn't be as good, it wouldn't it that they really are adding something to it. And I thought, yeah, this is what I'm talking about, because what I really feel is a successful co-creation of research with students is where the student has had that role, that they have really been able to add value to the project. So one way that obviously lots of us might be doing this is working with undergraduate or master students in terms of their dissertation research projects that they do. Um, and I think that this is a really good opportunity to co-create research with students. I'm a psychologist, I work in the psychology department, but we've had that sort of science background. So students are going to be planning a project, collecting data, analysing that data, and writing it up. And I think this presents a brilliant opportunity for us to co-create research with them. But it can depend on many variables, including how invested the student is in their project, how much they're maybe willing to take risks with their project, how much they're willing to take on your input. So it really is a co creation rather than just us as an academic maybe supporting them to reach their end goal of being able to submit a project. But I think that the work that they do can definitely be publishable research. But in order to make that, it needs to have a supervisor that's got that potential outcome so that we're adding value to their project. Because as a student, they may not think their research is going to be publishable. But as a supervisor, if we can add our value to it, we could have in mind from the beginning as they're designing it, okay, this might be something that could be published. And if it's going to be published, we need to make sure that we meet various criteria, etc. So I think before the students submit their piece of work for their final year project, as a supervisor, we might have that in mind. Once it's then submitted is when we can really think about co-creating with the student, because the assessment has occurred, they've had their mark, and we can then work with them. But there's so many things that impact whether that research really is going to be co-created or whether it is just a student project. They've learned from it what they needed to learn from it, but actually in terms of the research, you've been more of a facilitator, a supporter, rather than a co-creator. In psychology, we also have a specific module called the Research Assistantship module. This is a level 5 module where students can choose a project that's been advertised by a supervisor, which they're going to basically work on as like a research assistant. It is an assessed module, but they're not assessed by the contribution they made to the project. Instead, they're assessed by a sort of portfolio, a reflection of what they learned from the process. And these projects tend to be quite supervisor driven. It fits within our modular structure. So it's a 13-week module, but really they've got about 10 weeks working on the project. And in 10 weeks, it can be hard sometimes for them to really have had enough time to get involved in the project. Research takes time, doesn't it? So I think that they might just be involved in one phase of the project, such as, the literature reviewing phase, such as a data collection phase or a data analysis phase. Within those 10 weeks, it's very difficult for them to be involved in all phases. And we get students who take this module for a real variety of reasons. And thinking back to that definition of co-creation, it relies on there being cooperation, collaboration. So there's got to be a shared goal. And sometimes the student's goal in taking that module might not align necessarily with the research goal. So their goal might be to get better at research methods. And that's going to be slightly different to the supervisor's goal of creating the research. So the student might think, oh, that's great, I've had some practice of entering data, carrying out some statistical analysis. I've got what I wanted, I'm done now. They haven't really co-created. Other students can get really involved in the projects, and I think some of the best co-created research with students experience I've had have come from this module, where students in that 10 weeks have got really involved in planning and designing a project. So maybe I initially had looked for students to get involved in the literature review, and they've done that, and then they've really shown that, okay, I want to do more. I want to keep being involved in this. So then, although the module's technically finished and they've carried out, the work they'd agreed to do as part of the module, they continue to be involved in some way. Yeah, because they now sort of share our passion for the research. They've read the literature and they're like, yes, there's a gap here. We don't want to find the answer to this question, and this is how. And then they are really co-creating because they've had that opportunity to engage with the literature and really become experts in the area in many ways themselves. So although it can be a really frustrating experience sometimes because it's such a short period of time, students maybe doing it for a real variety of reasons, it can also become one of the most rewarding. But then there's that slight dilemma that sometimes, students are doing these things on very much a voluntary basis because they've done the module, they've got their credits, and then they're volunteering their time. And I sometimes have a little bit of a conflict there that I just don't feel it's very open to all equality and diversity. Some students have free time and some students don't have free time. And I always feel a bit sad then that, those students who can't volunteer their time and not get paid for it maybe are missing out sometimes on these co-creation opportunities. Um, and then the implications that potentially has for future CVs and things. And that very much follows through to we run in psychology a summer internship scheme where again supervisors advertise projects, students apply. It is a competitive process, but it's a voluntary position. So I'm sure that there are students who would like to do it, potentially gain a lot from doing it, and make a huge contribution to our research. But because it's not a paid position, they can't afford to do it over the summer. So again, I think that the summer internships can be really good, a little bit like the research assistantship module. Sometimes it's limited in terms of the time that's available, but students generally do them because they are interested in the project, because they're motivated to find the answer to the research question, and then they've got that shared goal and they can really get involved in the projects. But yeah, I do worry about it a little bit from that inclusivity, diversity perspective. And something else we have in psychology, we have placement year students, and sometimes these placement year students actually end up involved in research, and this can be in one of two contexts. So we have students who are out on placement, often in schools, working in areas of children's well-being, family engagement, that sort of thing. And quite often the schools say, oh, while the students are here, could they possibly do a research project? And that can be a really nice co-creation because you've got the placement provider, the student, and then us as an academic input. But we're very much working towards a goal that's normally being kind of laid out by the placement provider, that they've got a problem that they want solving. But because then we can work so collaboratively to solve it, it feels like it moves on from collaboration and becomes co-creation, because the students have different ideas because of what they see on placement, but also because of what they bring from their kind of university knowledge, um, that they very much are adding value. We also have some placement students, both from psychology department here, but also from other psychology departments, who do a placement that's based at a university that might be a mixture of kind of research and teaching support. And often those might be students who are thinking in the future they might want to go on and do a PhD, maybe become an academic. And so they're using their placement year as an undergraduate student to kind of test out, gain that sort of experience. And again, these can be really good co-creation experiences because you've got that longer time period. You've got a whole year potentially working with that student. They'll be working on a number of different projects, but they have that time, because I think that's one thing. Co-creating research with students takes time. Like research, that takes time too, doesn't it? Um, And then, of course, there are those opportunities where you might have small funding pots and you can pay students to be involved, not as research participants, but as researchers, co-creating the research. I like this because it feels really good from that inclusivity, diversity aspect that I was talking about, that it's then open to all students. Often these are opportunities that might happen over the summer, but for students who can't give up their time for free, it gives that opportunity for them to be paid. But there's been quite a lot of research within psychology about reward and the effect it has on motivation. And if you imagine that you're going to paint a fence and somebody says, I'll give you £20 for painting that fence, it's quite hard work painting that fence. You get to the end of the fence and they give you £20. You go, thanks, see you later. And you don't really want to do it anymore. But actually, if you weren't given a reward, but you felt really valued for your time, you might be more motivated to keep doing it. And I do see this sometimes with the paid research things that people sort of work to do the task that was set out, but thinking about that co-creation, they don't really necessarily give that added value. Yes, they've made a really valuable contribution. They've helped collect the data or they've helped do whatever the paid hours was for, but it's like they haven't quite given that extra from themselves, their own ideas. They've been paid to do a job, so they've done the job and then they've moved on and they do something else, which is absolutely fine. But I think that sometimes it's it's harder maybe with the paid researchers to get that co-creation because it's straight away you're paying them to do a job. So they see it as I'll do the job and then I've done the job and it's finished. And I don't know, I find it hard to explain, but I think subtly there is something a little bit different. Yeah, yeah. They, almost like working to the brief rather than questioning the brief. Okay, rather than doing it like this, why don't you do it like this? Which can be brilliant when students ask those questions as co-researchers. And there's something about when you're paying them to do it, they almost feel then like there's a hierarchy or they're not allowed to question. And I think that's something that maybe it's easier to overcome when there isn't money involved. So yeah, I feel a bit mixed about that one. Um, I carry out pedagogic research, so research into teaching and learning, particularly around kind of the area of student engagement with feedback, just because that's something that I'm particularly interested in. And working with students on those projects can be so rewarding because they've got that lived experience. They're the experts. So suddenly, yeah, co-creating research with the people who are experiencing whatever it is we're researching, they can say, oh, but hang on a minute, have you thought about this? Or why don't we do it this way? And I found those suddenly the value that the students can add is huge to those projects because no longer is it sort of an academic and educator going, I think this is what we ought to do for this project. You've got that voice of the people who actually the outcomes of this project is going to directly impact, going about this or doing it this way. Um, so I found that really, really rewarding. My sort of own area of research is child development. And again, I've really found students are often able to make really useful contributions and really add value there as well. And I think again, this depends on the topic areas that people research in their disciplines. But we're all children once. We all interact with children. We all see children. And I do find that often, yes, students will add value to that quite niche discipline specific research because they have some experiences, they have ideas that, oh, yeah, seeing that from a different perspective, or even just that more maybe lay perspective that we can get so wrapped up in cognitive development, development of children's understanding that you almost forget that there's actually those real world experiences too. We need to design research that has that ecological validity that is actually going to make sense to the children, potentially to the parents that are taking part. So I think whatever the type of research is, from my experience, students can really add value, particularly with the pedagogic, but also with the discipline specific. But I think that might differ depending on people's discipline areas. Why do I do it? I do it and I keep doing it because I find it really rewarding. I think it's one of those things, sometimes it just sits well with your own values. That struggle of trying to weigh up teaching versus research and really wanting to do more than will fit into any 24-hour day because you want to really make sure the students are succeeding, having a good experience, but you're also really passionate about the research and making sure that you are keeping your research profile up, etc., and finding the answers to those research questions that you feel is important. So co-creating research with students helps in some ways to balance those two things that as an academic I feel pull me not always in the same direction. This way, that way, this way, that way. When I think, right, I'm doing research, but I'm also adding value to this student's experience. They're adding value to my research. Win-win situation. I don't know if you've seen this flywheel, but this is the new Staffordshire University strategic mission that's recently kind of been shared, and I think that this co-creating research with students fits really well in terms of reflecting the university's mission, particularly around student employability, increasing obviously our student employability. I think that students who are able to say that they've been involved in research projects during their undergraduate degree and can demonstrate the value, so that really they have co-created that research, will it really will help their employability, I think. Obviously, it's helping build the reputation of the university as somewhere that's engaged with research and innovation. And it is very much that phenomenon-based learning that the students, as they co-create the research, are learning through doing rather than just learning by being talked at. So I think it's something that, yeah, personally, I've always done, and I really find very enjoyable and very rewarding. And I also hope that it's something that's going to become more widely recognised and supported by the university, because it does align so well with the mission. So, what makes a successful experience? I think it really is about having that shared passion, that feeling of really wanting it, really having that passion about the research question, or just a shared passion even about research. So I think of some of the students that I've co-created with, sometimes they're just like, it's research, I want to be involved in it," and that can be really, really good.